So, I'd be remiss if we did not talk about some of the great things that the Montreal Canadiens have cooking in their prospect system today. Because we've got three guys that we can dive into today. Two mainstay guys, and another sort of extra Olympic-based story that's not really a big deal, but then again, I think that there will be some people who are interested in that. Let's talk about that at the end of this video. But I also wanted to highlight two very important names in the Montreal Canadiens organization. Because earlier yesterday, the Montreal Canadiens announced that they had sent a very important name down to the Laval Rocket to play. Ladies and gentlemen, today is David Reinbacher's first game in the AHL this season. And normally that wouldn't really be a big deal. It's like, oh yeah, amazing. A young guy's playing in the AHL. Why is that a thing? Like, why are we talking about that? Well, it's mostly because of the story here. David Reinbacher is a guy who was injured for the majority of last season, and it stunted his development. A lot of folks were really disappointed in his health status from last year. He only played 10 games. And the years before that were not particularly great for his development when you consider the talent level of the team that he was on in Switzerland and how it didn't really work out. Now this season, after succumbing to yet another injury before the season began, David Reinbacher will finally be making his debut at the end of October. If there is a time where the top right-handed defenseman prospect in Reinbacher is going to start developing and really putting in that work to becoming a full NHL player, this is that time. And it's not going to happen right away. We saw this happen last year. David Reinbacher made his debut towards the end of the Laval Rockets season, and he actually was pretty good in the playoffs. He was half a point a game, which is quite substantial when you consider the fact that Reinbacher isn't really like a top-tier point-producing defenseman. He just happened to get a bunch of points, and that was pretty good, I'd say, for him and his profile. But it shows a lot more potential than we might have initially anticipated for a guy who had spent so much time off, hoping that he'd be able to get better in time. Now, he's going to have a full season's worth of time. That is, of course, knock on wood, everything goes well for Reinbacher and his overall progression here. But you gotta start somewhere, right? And that's exactly what Reinbacher is going to be doing today. I think a lot of Canadiens fans are cheering for this guy, not necessarily because fans everywhere are super fans of this guy, but because they have no choice but to cheer for him because of that story. Any guy who goes through all the trial and tribulations like Reinbacher has, you automatically want to see overcome those obstacles and become the best version of themselves in the NHL. And for Reinbacher, we saw this during some of the earlier games that he was able to play before he got hurt. It's not like he's fully ready to be an NHL guy just yet, but he's on his way there. He's only 21 years old, so there's a lot of time for him to still continue to progress, and I don't think anybody's going to discredit the growth that he has exhibited the past little while. But Reinbacher still, he does have a few more hurdles to go through before he becomes a full-time NHL guy. It's just going to take a while, and this will be step one in that. So pay attention to the Laval Rocket on this Halloween as David Reinbacher suits up and starts out his season. But sticking out with Montreal Canadiens prospects, we have some very, very good news with Habs' young Russian Alexander Zharovsky, who went out there and scored 2 assists today playing for Salavat Yuleyev, which puts him in very, very good company in the KHL. Take a look at this. Alexander Zharovsky, in the limited sample so far this KHL season, has scored himself 14 points in 13 games. He is on pace for over a point per game this season, on pace for about 65 points with Salavat Yuleyev. And you talk about last year, the fact that Ivan Demidov was able to net himself the KHL record for most points in a season by a junior player. He had 49 points in 65 games played. Alexander Zharovsky is on pace to getting about 15 more points than that. And if you watch the tape, it's easy to see why. Alexander Zharovsky, dare I say, this guy looks like Ivan Demidov in the way that he moves, in the way that he shifts around, and the way that he creates offense for Salavat Yuleyev in the KHL. I'm not saying that Zharovsky is going to be a 5th overall caliber talent, a guy who steps into the NHL and is immediately on pace for 60 or 70 points like Demidov is right now, but just stylistically, the way he moves, the way he skates, the way he throws the puck out in front, and the way he's able to convert on those opportunities, Zharovsky reminds me of Ivan Demidov when I sit down and I watch the tape and I see what he does in the offensive zone that works. It's very interesting, the fact that Montreal was able to get 2 Russian guys that exhibit this very similar type of play style just within a few years of each other in the draft. And with the fact that Demidov knows and is familiar with Zharovsky, he vouched for Zharovsky when Kent Hughes asked Demidov, hey, should we draft this guy? What's the situation? I mean, that says it all right there. There's so much love to go around with the talent and the skills that these guys have that ultimately, if Zharovsky ends up breaking Demidov's point record, I wouldn't be surprised at this point. The guy's over a point per game, 13 games in. Now, I should also note, Zharovsky did not score in the first 3 games of the KHL season this year. So if you remove those, he essentially is at 14 points in only 10 games played. That's a much better point-per-game metric, and puts him on pace to doing some fantastic things as the year goes on. Now, we also have to do some caveats here. Just because Alexander Zharovsky is on pace to breaking Demidov's junior point record does not mean in the slightest that he will be better than Demidov. It is very, very paramount that we point out that Salavat Yuleyev is a much worse team than SKA St. Petersburg was last year in the KHL. Even though SKA did underperform, and we can talk about that because of Roman Rottenberg and everything, even though that was the case with that squad, Salavat Yuleyev is giving Alexander Zharovsky opportunities on the ice that Demidov never really got last year when he suited up in the KHL. This is because Salavat Yuleyev, as a worse team, they kind of have no choice but to rely on everybody that is actually productive and is actually good. SKA St. Petersburg, because they're SKA St. Petersburg, they had the luxury of being able to sit Demidov and bench Demidov and not play Demidov and get away with it relatively unscathed. Now, sure, they didn't produce all too well when Demidov wasn't playing, but that was more of a decision that they made on their behalf. They didn't prioritize the growth of Ivan Demidov. They prioritized sending a message and saying, hey, you're not going to stay in Russia? Okay, well, we're going to punish you and this and that and whatever. So obviously there were some politics involved in the way Demidov was deployed last year. It doesn't seem to be the case with Alexander Zharovsky because of how much they rely on him to produce and how much it's actually worked so far. So if he ends up breaking that Ivan Demidov point record, it's not going to be because he's better. A lot of it is going to be because he is straight up just being given better opportunities. We said the same thing about Kirill Kaprizov when Demidov broke the Kaprizov record, because at that point, it's like, yeah, Kaprizov was also on Salavat Yuleyev when he had his rookie record set in place. So the fact that Demidov was able to break that despite the circumstances with SKA, that was a really big piece of info and one of the more underrated elements to that story. So now, Alexander Zharovsky, he's in a spot to do the same thing, maybe even do a little bit more. We'll see. But for now, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Montreal Canadiens prospects that are suiting up today and that are doing some really good work? David Reinbacher is finally in. That is awesome to hear from Montreal Canadiens fans. And Alexander Zharovsky is doing things that haven't been done in the KHL since, well, last year. So, thoughts in the comment section below about these two prospects. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.